For the Elk Hair Caddis tonight, we'll use a brown saddle hackle. I will use a tan poly yarn. Now you can also use dubbing for this, but I prefer to use the poly. It's easier to work with. It's a water resistant. It will shed water very readily, and it's easier to work with, a lot easier.
So it probably floats better.
Yes, it does. I'll also use elk hair, of course, in the name the Elk Hair Caddis. Okay, I have a number 10 standard length shank hook in the vise, a dry fly hook. The first thing I want to tie on is a piece of poly yarn. I'll just lay it on, take a soft loop, tie it down. You don't need a whole lot of wraps on that. Next thing I'm going to tie...
Just one second now, you said a soft loop?
Soft loop.
What is that?
I just make a very loose wrap over the top of the material. I don't pull down on it till I get the thread all the way underneath the vise and start around on the other side. Then I'll pull tight, take one more tight wrap.
That just keeps the material on top of the hook.
Keeps the material on top, very important. Another thing that I really like to do that's very important to get hackle to wrap correctly is strip part of that hackle away from the end of the stem. I want to start wrapping with a bare stem. I'm going to tie that on next. Again, I'm just going to take a soft wrap over it. Now I'm going to run my thread to the front of the hook. I don't need it there anymore. I'm finished with what I do.
Right up to the eye? Or
almost to the eye. I like to stay about an eye length back because I have to have room for the head. Always don't crowd the head. Now, one little trick that I've learned over the years, many times when you see a fly, the hackle, the ribbing, whatever portion is falling off the rear of the hook. It's too close to the rear. I'm going to take a wrap of this body material, this poly, be it dubbing or whatever. Right now we're using the poly yarn behind that hackle. That way the hackle is not going to start all the way at the very back of the hook.
Now, would you do that regardless of what you were using for a rib?
Yes, I will.
That's a great trick.
Same thing on the ribbing, on hackle, whatever.
Because a big problem with the rib is coming loose.
Yes.
Yes. That's a great trick.
Now you see I have tapered that body slightly as I've come forward. Now I'm going to trim off the excess here. Don't need it. Now here comes the hackle. I have tied the hackle so the shiny side is forward. That's just my own personal preference of doing it. If you would like it the other way, that's up to you.
In fact, I usually do it the other way. In fact, that points up something for the people that are watching is there are very few right and wrong ways to tie flies.
Absolutely not.
Everybody does it differently.
As long as the product comes out the same. And they will.
They will.
They will.
But the more people you can watch and learn from, the better, and then sort things out and see what works best for you.
Now I have the hackle wrapped forward. The next thing I'm going to take is just a small clump of elk hair. You don't need a whole lot. And with any deer or elk, there's going to be some under fur in here. You can see it start to come out. I'll just pull it, get it out of the way. And now you can see that those tips are very uneven, very uneven. You can tie them on like that, won't hurt a thing. The fish never know if they're even or not, but we call this angler's art. So I'll put it in a hair stacker. I will make the tips nice and even.
You know, I think you made one point there is, notice how small that is. Whenever I have trouble making the wings sit tightly in one spot, it's because I've taken too much.
That's correct. In fact, I pulled a little bit off. I felt I had too much. Now I've measured the length. It's going to come just beyond the bend of the hook. I'll change hands now. Put that in there. Again, I'm going to take a fairly soft wrap, and you can see the hair flare a little bit. Now, I'm going to let go of that. I'm going to stand these butts up in the air and take 3 or 4 wraps in front. That will serve 2 purposes. Every hook will have a very slight opening in that eye. By wrapping that thread head there, what that does is kind of close that eye up. Otherwise, it could cut your leader as you tie it in. I'm going to come now back behind those butts again and trim them off. Now, one way that I trim this, that I get them the same length each time, as you run your scissors in, just touch that bottom blade to the eye of the hook and cut.
Now that wing is really locked in there too.
Wing is locked in. Now I'm going to build just a little whip finish here, and you don't need a whole lot. And cut it off.
Beautiful.
Now you can see that does, I've got one little butt section sticking up there. I'll break him off. And there's the Elk Hair Caddis.
What materials did you use?
What materials did I use? Again, I'll use the brown saddle hackle. I will use a tan poly yarn dubbing or polypropylene yarn dubbing, and I will use elk hair. For the thread that I use, I like to match the color of the body to the thread, or the thread to the color of the body, whichever. And that's the Elk Hair Caddis.